Welcome back, everyone. You've tuned into another deep dive.
Yeah, where we really get into a set of sources, pull out the key ideas for you.
Exactly. Kind of like your shortcut to really getting it, finding those moments that just, will click.
And as many of you know, we did a deep dive into Volume 1 of Luisa Piccoretta's The Divine Will before, and we got a lot of interest, actually. So we decided let's continue the journey with Volume 2.
That's right. So if you found that first discussion helpful, well, you're definitely in for another fascinating look here. These writings cover roughly March to October 1899.
And what really stands out in this volume, I think, is you see this deepening of Luisa's personal connection with Jesus, but also this real emphasis on obedience.
Yeah.
Especially obedience to her confessor about, writing down everything she was experiencing internally.
Absolutely. And beyond just that, you really encounter these deep dives into core parts of our faith, things like charity, humility, suffering,
Right.
and even these quite intense concepts of divine justice and chastisements. It's quite a lot.
It is. And through it all, you get these incredible glimpses, these little windows into how she experienced God, the spiritual life itself.
Yeah. Now, it's worth remembering, like we said with Volume 1, these are, very personal, mystical accounts.
Definitely.
Our goal isn't to sort of prove or disprove anything here. It's more about understanding the themes, the images she uses, the recurring ideas within these writings.
Exactly. Just trying to unpack what's there for you. So, okay, where should we start?
Well, let's maybe start right where these excerpts begin. Luisa's really facing this big challenge, isn't she? Her confessor tells her to write everything down, and it causes her a lot of, distress.
Oh, absolutely. You see her really in turmoil, almost suffering because of this command. Her first reaction is like, I can't do this, that feeling of inadequacy.
And she takes this, while she goes directly to Jesus about it, right? Expresses all her fears, feelings that she's just not capable. It feels very raw, actually.
It does. And what's interesting, I think, is how Jesus responds. Or rather, how he doesn't respond immediately. He doesn't jump right in to address her worries about the writing itself, which leads her to kind of look inward, doesn't it? She starts questioning if maybe she's the reason for this silence she feels.
That's such a key point. Yeah. She immediately sort of takes responsibility, asks forgiveness, and then makes this really profound promise of obedience, even offering her life as a sacrifice. That's powerful.
It really is. And then Jesus responds, very tenderly, reassuringly. He asks her basically, what are you afraid of? Haven't I helped you before?
Right.
And he promises his light will be there guiding her hand as she writes.
Which just underlines that theme of obedience we mentioned. It's clearly not just like following a rule.
No.
It's an act of deep trust, a sacrifice that actually opens her up to getting divine assistance.
Yeah.
That connection between obedience and her spiritual path just keeps coming up.
Precisely. It's foundational for her. Okay, so moving on from that, let's talk about faith itself and how God is, portrayed in these experiences. There's that beautiful analogy she uses, the timid birds.
Oh, yeah, I found that really vivid. These little birds, right?
Yeah.
They're scared, so they build nests way up high. They only come down carefully for food, and the really cautious ones even take it back up high to eat safely.
Yeah.
It gives you this picture of the soul's faith as something kind of delicate, needing refuge in God's high places.
And what's fascinating there is how she links the bird coming down for food with the soul drawing grace, but always staying rooted up high in faith.
Right.
It suggests faith is both that safe place, that refuge, and the source of our spiritual sustenance. It's not one or the other.
And then Luisa gets into these mystical experiences of God, describing him as like this all-enveloping light. But it's more than just seeing light, isn't it? It's about his very nature.
Exactly. She sees God as light containing all the perfections, beauty, strength, wisdom, immensity, everything. It's this feeling of God being limitless, yet also incredibly close. She even says something like, even in the air we breathe is God present and we breathe him.
That's incredible.
So, each one can make him his own life. It really hammers home God's immanence, his closeness everywhere.
That idea is so powerful, isn't it? God being so present, like the air, and yet we're often totally unaware. But she also talks about his incomprehensibility, this vastness that we just can't fully grasp, even when she feels him right there inside her.
Yeah, that paradox, the intimate and the infinite, which actually leads really nicely into another major analogy she uses a lot, comparing God to the sun. This one is just packed with theology for you.
Yeah, the sun makes so much sense as a symbol, doesn't it? Light, life, energy. Calling it a shadow of God in creation feels right. She talks about how it shows up in beauty, smells, and obviously light.
Right, and she imagines God sort of hidden within the sun's sphere, ruling everything from there.
Like a king.
Kind of. But what's really insightful is how she breaks down the sun's qualities and maps them onto God's attributes. She starts with the globe and the rays.
The globe is God's essence. The rays are his attributes.
Exactly. And then she gets into the Trinity analogy, which I think is incredibly helpful for trying to grasp that mystery.
Yeah, the fire is the Father, light is the Son, heat is the Holy Spirit. All in one Son, can't separate them.
Right. And just like you can't pull apart fire, light, and heat, she says the power of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is one, indivisible, eternal. It makes this deep mystery feel a bit more, well, approachable for you.
But she keeps going with it, doesn't she?
Yeah.
The sun's light reaching everywhere mirrors God's omnipresence.
But God goes even where sunlight can't.
And the sun's purity, how it shines on rubbish but isn't dirtied, that reflects God's holiness, his immaculateness, even seeing all our sins.
And its generosity, giving light and life to everyone without getting smaller itself. That's like God's generosity to you, to all of us.
Unchanging, too. The sun always majestic, like God's unchanging nature. Even its roundness symbolizes eternity. No beginning, no end.
It's incredibly thorough, this analogy. And she wraps it up by saying how overwhelming both suns are, the physical one and the divine one, just highlighting our limits and understanding something so immense.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How creation itself reflects God, gives us these little hints, even if they're just shadows.
Definitely.
Okay, so shifting back to the personal relationship after all this talk about faith and God, Jesus says something really direct. Faith is God. That's quite a statement for you to mull over.
It is. And right after that, you get this really tender moment between Luisa and Jesus about love. She asks him if he loves her.
And he says yes. And it's like, you love me, I love you, so let us love each other and remain always together.
Yeah. Just so simple, but so deep. That mutual love, that desire for union, it really shows you the intimacy of their relationship.
It does. But even with that closeness, Luisa still admits she can't fully grasp this divine sun she feels wrapped in. She feels like she gets something, but then in his presence, it's like she understood nothing at all.
That humility, right. Even amidst these amazing experiences, she knows her limits. It's that vast difference between us and God, even when we feel closest.
Yeah. Okay, now, the tone kind of shifts here, doesn't it? We get into divine justice, chastisement, suffering. Jesus appears all embittered and afflicted.
Yes, this is definitely a more somber part of the writings for you. He tells Luisa his justice has become too heavy because of all the sin, the offenses.
And he starts talking about widespread chastisement, sudden deaths, diseases. He even calls it a sort of judgment.
These are really stark visions she has, and understandably, they terrify her, cause her real pain.
Yeah.
It brings up that whole difficult question for you about divine justice. How does it work?
And it's interesting, you pointed out earlier how his severity is actually linked to charity. He says charity is this outpouring of God, evident in creation, teaching us love.
Right, so even the justice, the warnings, seem rooted in love. It's not arbitrary anger, but a response to rejecting that love, which is everywhere in creation.
That's crucial to grasp, I think. Then she sees these awful visions, masses of sins, a terrifying star, volcanoes, conflict. It paints a pretty bleak picture of the world at that time.
And Jesus says something really significant. I am withdrawing from man. Implying this withdrawal will actually lead to worse things happening, a further slide into darkness.
Wow. And then you see Jesus himself grieving, crying over having to chastise people. He doesn't want to, but his justice demands it. That tension between mercy and justice is just so present.
It really is. And Luisa, bless her, pleads to suffer instead of others. She even wants to leave Earth if the chastisements have to happen. It shows you her deep compassion, her willingness to be that victim soul.
Right, that concept of offering suffering for others, which, for you listening, is a deep tradition in Catholic spirituality, souls uniting their suffering with Christ for salvation.
Exactly, and Jesus' answer is quite blunt. Ingratitude forces me to chastise. It really puts the responsibility back on human rejection of his love.
And then he said something really surprising, that the greatest chastisement would be removing the state of suffering. That's counterintuitive.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Maybe removing suffering means removing the chance for redemptive suffering, for joining our pain with Christ's. So for you, it suggests suffering offered in faith isn't just bad, it's an opportunity. Its absence could mean being cut off from something spiritually vital.
That completely reframes how you might look at suffering.
Okay.
Let's shift to something a bit lighter, charity. We touched on it, but Jesus calls it a simple outpouring of the divine being.
Yeah.
What's the significance of simple there?
Well, like God himself, who is immense but also fundamentally simple, charity is simple. It just flows out everywhere, loving everyone, friend, foe, high status, low status, it doesn't matter. It's universal, unbiased, divine love.
And there's that contrast with what the devil offers, just a colored virtue. What's the real difference for you?
The devil might talk a good game about virtue, maybe even tempt people to do things that look good on the surface.
Right.
But he can't infuse true virtue. That requires God's grace. So the devil's version lacks staying power, lacks that deep inner peace. True virtue from Jesus, that brings courage, peace, endurance.
Good reminder for you. It's not just about what you do, but where it comes from in your inner state. Okay, humility. She uses that lovely image, the littlest plant.
Yes, but this tiny plant has branches reaching all the way to heaven, wrapping around God's throne, his heart. It's a powerful image for you of humility's reach.
And confidence is described as the branches of humility. She says you can't have true humility without confidence. That might sound odd to some.
It's a subtle point, isn't it? Humility here isn't about beating yourself up until you can't function. It's knowing you're small, but confidently relying on God's massive grace and power. Without that confidence, humility might just be false modesty or, worse, lead to despair.
That makes perfect sense, knowing your place, but trusting his love. Now, there are times Jesus withdraws. His felt presence from her keeps her in the shadow of my charity. Even though she's still in his love, this absence causes her immense pain.
Absolutely. Even knowing she's enveloped in his love, not feeling his direct presence is agonizing for her. It just shows you how intense their union was.
And what does she do? She offers up that pain to make up for any ingratitude and just pleads for him to come. It feels very human, that longing.
And when he does reappear, often he's showing his own suffering, the thorns, the wounds, and asks her for refreshment.
Wow.
This idea that her love, her suffering, can actually console Jesus. It's quite something for you to consider. It's reciprocal.
It really blurs those lines, doesn't it? Not just God giving grace downwards. It's mutual.
Yeah.
And after one of these absences, Mary tells Luisa to ask Jesus what he wants to make of her, his answer. I want to make you an object of my satisfactions. What do you take from that?
It sounds like her whole being, her life, her suffering, is meant to bring comfort, maybe even fulfillment, to Jesus himself. It points to this incredibly unique role she has in his plan, deeply united with him.
Which leads us to a really significant point about the Eucharist. Jesus tells her something amazing. Being in the sacrament for me is the same as being in your heart.
Yeah, but then he adds, or rather, in you I find something more.
Right, he can share his pains with her, have her as a living victim before divine justice, something he says he doesn't find in the sacrament in the same way.
It's a stunning statement about the intimacy he finds in her soul. While the Eucharist is his real presence, absolutely central, he's suggesting that in her heart, he finds this unique companionship in suffering, this living sacrifice.
And she feels his sufferings in her own heart, the thorns, the cross, his heart's pain. She sees this braid of iron spikes around his heart.
It really emphasizes her role as a victim soul, doesn't it? Sharing his passion. And Jesus says the things that wound his heart most are sacrilegious masses and hypocrisy.
Yeah, hypocrisy being that outward show of love covering up inner nastiness or self-interest. A strong condemnation of religious fakeness.
Definitely. All those hypocritical works, even if they look holy, are like poison to him. And this broadens out, doesn't it, to offenses within the church generally. He shows her sins happening even among devout people and priests.
She sees devout souls distracted by trivial things right before communion, their minds miles away. And even worse, priests acting almost satanically, becoming idols for people.
And he says the pain from his own, especially priests, hurts more than from outsiders because they wound him in his most sensitive and tender parts. It highlights that heavy responsibility and the potential for deep betrayal within the clergy.
It's a sobering thing for you to think about the need for genuine devotion.
Yeah.
How even those seemingly close can cause him sorrow.
Okay, switching gears.
Yeah.
Detachment and purity. Souls detached from everything are like crystals filled with God's light.
Yeah, that's the image. A crystal lets light shine right through unobstructed. Detached souls are like that for God's light. He loves souls like that. And that image of a big heart but a narrow door. Only the detached, naked, simple souls can get in. It really stresses that any attachment, any impure motive, blocks full union.
Right. Even loving your neighbor, he says, needs to be united with love for God to truly be his love. One single love flowing towards him.
It all has to point back to God, ultimately.
Yeah.
Okay, we circle back to the chastisements again. Luisa's upset about Jesus' absence, but still worried about justice.
Yes, she sees visions of widespread disease, divine anger against evil, and she pleads, pour the bitterness into me instead.
But he says no, initially. He says freeing her from suffering would be the greatest chastisement because her suffering acts like a dam holding back his justice. That's complex.
It really is. It speaks to that idea of vicarious suffering again, for you. Her pain benefits others, appeases justice somehow. Eventually, though, he does share his bitter breath with her, symbolizing his own deep suffering from sin.
And she feels overwhelmed by it, this intense pain, a glimpse into his agony. Then there's a section on the virtue of the cross, how it brings patience, unites heaven and earth, detaches us.
Yeah, the cross as this powerful tool for spiritual change. But Jesus complains that most people don't get it, so they reject it.
He emphasizes, he's looking for the soul that strips itself of its own will, so his will can flood in and divinize it. That surrender of self-will is so key.
And he calls out those who seem devout but freak out over tiny inconveniences. It shows their own will is still running the show, not God's.
A good gut check for you. So,
Right.
true devotion shows up in the small surrenders too. Then, self-knowledge.
Contempt of self is good, but only if it's rooted in faith. Why that distinction?
Because without faith, seeing your own nothingness can just crush you, make you want to give up. But with faith, knowing you're nothing leads you to rely completely on God, trusting he can work through your weakness.
Makes sense. There's that steamer analogy to the soul, and God moves forward because of his power, not its own. You attribute all progress to him.
And Jesus asks her straight up, who am I and who are you? Just highlighting that vast gap between infinite God and our nothingness. He says the greatest gift is helping a soul truly see herself like that. Getting that true perspective on our dependence and his greatness. Okay, back to obedience. Jesus warns the confessor, doesn't he? Don't go looking for everyone to approve of Luisa's experiences. Even he faced opposition.
Exactly. He tells the confessor, basically, consult wise priests, pray, get advice, but don't try to waste God's work by chasing popular opinion.
And for Luisa, just act simply, uprightly. Ignore what people think. Don't try to please everyone. Focus on God's will, not human approval.
And Lady Obedience is almost like a character here, right? This powerful, sometimes unpredictable force in her life, even seeming to block her desire for Jesus sometimes. But Jesus confirms, true obedience rules over everything.
He even tells the confessor you can't separate souls totally immersed in him, like mixing liquids. And the priest is necessary, even if it means the soul's crucifixion. Spiritual direction is vital.
Which leads to that beautiful description of the church as veil heaven.
Yeah, like heaven hidden on earth. God is the head, like the Pope is the head. The Pope's tiara even veiling the Trinity, different members, orders, all beautifying the church.
And the stress is on living the virtues. That's what brings the fragrance, the light, drawing people in. But infected members who spread darkness, they cause terrible pain. It's the church as a living body, see? Every part matters.
It really reminds you of the responsibility each of us has.
Yeah.
Than the power of pleasing Jesus alone.
A soul focused only on pleasing him, it has this incredible pull on his heart, almost compelling him to grant what she asks. Luisa's inner offerings of suffering show this.
That single-minded devotion moves God. And then Jesus shows her his heart with these globes inside faith, hope, and charity, gifts for humanity. And he explains how to exercise them.
Yes, faith. You fly on its wings to know God better, dissolve your nothingness in his light. Hope. You dive into Christ's merits to get faith's treasures, overcome fear, become stable, make God your own. It's the door to heaven for you.
And charity.
Charity. You immerse yourself in that huge ocean of love, become one with God, feel incredible joy. Everything you do becomes love.
It's a beautiful path for you. Faith finds, hope obtains, charity unites. Sadly, the text then shifts to the sin of abortion.
Yeah. Jesus expresses deep grief over lost souls, especially the unborn who die without baptism. He calls it a sin that weighs heavily on justice, crying out for vengeance. Very strong, sorrowful words.
Following that, there's reflection on purity of intention, doing good purely for God, and the ideal of the creature just disappearing, becoming one with God.
Yeah.
No self in the way.
And Jesus compares himself to someone sick needing relief from love's fire, finding it in the pain suffered by souls purely for love of him. Suffering for God is called a coin of inestimable value.
Reinforces that idea of redemptive suffering again, its worth to God. He also explains he works perfection slowly, letting the soul see its flaws and strive, creating his divine commerce between them.
It's this ongoing growth, deepening union. And his love for Luisa, he calls her his dove, his temple. Her longing for him eases his suffering from other sins. He says his love is so huge he has to hide some of it so she's not overwhelmed.
Incredible intimacy. The cross comes up again, a path to glory, paved with stars becoming suns. The reward is immense, divine. It makes the soul transparent, ready for God.
And then, paradoxically perhaps for you, chastisements are called infinite mercies from his loving heart. Since humanity came from him, meant for love, sin makes us bitter, causing him sorrow because we belong to him. So great love is why he chastises to save us.
A challenging view, but ultimately about love. Then there's the office of Magdalene. A soul truly sorry for sin is already doing what Magdalene did. Sorrow, exquisite love, binding herself to him.
And total detachment, absolutely essential for Jesus to dwell within, for virtues to grow, needs that inner space.
There's advice for priests, too. Focus on virtue. Avoid getting tangled in family or worldly business. Ministers detached from earthly things won't lack what they need.
And God's reluctance to enter impure souls, like a king won't enter a filthy house. He wants us to do the cleaning first, remove the rot of sins.
Right. Finally, hope is called a peacemaking mother. Her kingdom is peace and justice. Entering hope disarms justice through prayer, aligning with his will, and worrying when you should be at peace. Like a rich queen crying poverty. It's about trust.
Powerful image to end on. Trust and peace. So wow, another really rich deep dive into volume 2.
Absolutely. You see that deep link between obedience and God speaking to her. These incredible analogies for God in the Trinity.
And that intense relationship she has with Jesus, the sweetness, but also the real pain when he feels distant.
Yeah, and grappling with divine justice, suffering, but also the power of faith, charity, humility, detachment. So much for you to take away.
It really is. And like we keep saying, these are personal mystical accounts within our Catholic faith. The idea is for you to think about the themes, the images, what they might spark in your own spiritual life.
What questions came up for you listening? What does detachment really look like? How do you hold God's love and his justice together? What's the place of suffering and spiritual growth? Just things for you to maybe chew on.
We really hope this deep dive has given you some valuable things to think about, encouraged you to reflect more deeply on these themes within our amazing Catholic tradition.
And just like after Volume 1, we'll say again, if there's continued interest from you all, we're definitely open to exploring the next volumes of The Divine Will.
Yeah, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to maybe diving even deeper next time.